Welcome to We Have Issues, the podcast where we examine important issues throughout the educational community. Our special guest today is Dr. Tim Rasinskl, the literacy guru from Kent State University. On timrasinskl.com, the following information is posted. Quote, Timothy Rasinskl is a professor of literacy education at Kent State University and former director of the award-winning Reading Clinic. He has written over 200 articles and has authored, co-authored, or edited over 50 books or curriculum programs on reading education. I have to tell you, that's pretty impressive. He's published numerous best-selling books with teacher-created materials and Shell Education, and has also authored books for Scholastic. His scholarly interests include reading fluency and word study, reading in the elementary and middle grades, and readers who struggle. His research on reading has been cited by the National Reading Panel and has been published in journals such as Reading Research Quarterly, The Reading Teacher, Reading Psychology, and the Journal of Educational Research. Tim Rasinskl served a 3-year term on the board of directors of the International Reading Association and was co-editor of The Reading Teacher, the world's most widely read journal of literacy education. He has also served as co-editor of the Journal of Literary Research. Dr. Rasinskl is past president of the College Reading Association, and he has won, this is pretty impressive now, he has won the A.B. Herr and Laureate Awards from the College Reading Association for his scholarly contributions to literacy education. In 2010, Tim Rasinskl was elected into the International Reading Hall of Fame. Prior to coming to Kent State, Timothy Rasinskl taught literacy education at the University of Georgia. He taught for several years as an elementary and middle school classroom teacher and Title I teacher in Nebraska. Tim is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, unquote. Tim Rasinskl is the first author of the Fluency chapter for the Handbook of Reading Research. He has also collaborated on many books, including Artfully Teaching the Science of Reading, Joyful Literacy, and Parent Power, You Can Teach Your Child at Home, and many titles featuring partner poems, word ladders, and Greek and Latin roots. Tim is a frequent presenter at professional meetings and an active consultant and speaker for school districts throughout the United States. He can be reached at trasinskl@kentedu.edu. Tim does a monthly blog on issues related to reading instruction, including read-to-use lessons at www.timrasinskl.com/blog.html. Tim's Twitter handle is @TimRasinskl1. Thank you for your service in the military and the field of education, Tim Rasinskl, and welcome to We Have Issues.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me. I've been a follower of you and your work supporting literacy instruction in the area of poetry just for a number of years. So it's really an honor and a treat to spend a few minutes chatting about a shared interest, literacy. Can I make one quick correction here on my email? It's trasinsk@kent.edu. When they first did it, they had to drop off the I at the end because we weren't allowed that many letters. So it's trasinsk@kent.edu.
Okay, let's all make a note of that in case we need to reach out. Thank you.
No problem at all. Yeah. But again, thanks for having me. And thanks especially for the kind introduction. It's more than enough of an introduction. Thanks.
I'm wondering when you sleep.
Well, I'm retiring soon, so I'm going to get caught up with that, with the sleeping issues.
Okay. Let me ask you, just to start out, when you were a child, were you an avid reader?
That's a great question because I was a good reader. I wasn't an avid reader. And, I've been thinking about that. Why? I was taught to read. Well, my parents were readers. Um, but I wasn't really drawn into books, and uh, that I like to read other things, shorter pieces, perhaps. Well, yeah, I guess my parents were reflections of that. I remember my mother had a whole collection of these Reader's Digest condensed books, books that you could read in a matter of a few hours or so. And my dad, of course, loved to dive into the newspaper. So it was those shorter pieces that's really, I guess, maybe I was drawn to. We did not have a lot of children's books in our house, and was not read to actually by my parents. So maybe, is that it shows the influence of parents in those early years. I do remember we used to get Life magazine, and my aunt would get Look magazine, and we'd have it for a week, and then we would switch. And again, because those magazines were full of illustrations and photographs, was something that I was drawn to. But it was really interesting to think about that notion that, yeah, just teaching somebody to read is not enough. We need to do something to try to develop that avidness, if you will, or that love of reading. And eventually, I am an avid reader now, but it was just an interesting thought to begin the conversation there.
When you were in school, how did they teach you to read?
Yeah, well, that's part of the whole system there. I didn't go to kindergarten. We didn't have kindergartens. I went to Catholic school. And anybody who's gone to Catholic school knows phonics is a big part of early literacy instruction. So
I
I
can
still,
vouch for that.
yeah, very much phonics, and it worked. I learned how to read using that. I remember doing the old handwriting exercises, and I still wonder why we don't do that anymore in some of our early literacy instruction, because I think a great way to learn your letters and your words are to write them out. So, I learned to read. But again, the good sisters of St. Joseph, as best I can recall, never read to us. We didn't have a classroom library. We didn't have a school library. So we didn't have access to this kind of material that nowadays children, they have and they need. How can you become a good reader if you don't have access to those kinds of materials there? But definitely phonics was a big part of it. And it's got to be a part of it. You've got to learn to decode the words before you can move on into those books that you want to read.
Now you've been doing a lot of work over the years with literacy, and you're known as probably, if not one of, or not if not the most, one of the most influential folks in that field of literacy and the teaching of literacy to pre-service teachers. How did you get involved with all
Yeah,
that? What was the
yeah,
genesis of your passion?
yeah. That's another great question. First of all, I would contest the what you just said about being one of the gurus there. I know there's a lot of people out there who would dispute that, but nevertheless, and you gave me this question in advance, so I had a chance to think about it. When I was in the service, I was involved in Big Brothers. So I was mentoring some boys who they didn't have a dad figure around. And, I noticed that a lot of these kids did had difficulty reading. And I said, wow, these are your fourth and fifth grade kids. And, you know, uh, we read something together, and, it just wasn't there for them. And so that basically sparked my interest in becoming a teacher. Now, my wife is a speech language SLP, and I still remember. I guess I was still I was using the GI Bill to become a teacher, and I remember taking classes. But she would come home and she'd say, I'm working with these kids who are, on problems with language and articulation and sounds. And their regular teachers coming up and asking me, "What are you doing with these kids?" Because now all of a sudden phonics is making sense to them. Uh, so it was sort of these kind of a roundabout way of developing this interest. And of course, once I became a teacher, you saw a number of kids that were having problems in my classroom in the schools that I was working with. And of course, I decided, as we all go on get our master's degree, to do mine in reading education. So basically, it was just seeing seeing it out there, seeing the so many kids having difficulty, and trying to find ways to help these kids. And it's not a simple answer. I mentioned phonics before, but phonics, as I said, only gets you so far down the road.
Now you're talking about the way that you took interest in the field of literacy. Was there a professor maybe along the way who taught a class where you said, darn, this is clear and this makes so much sense to me, and just kind of was that spark for you?
Yeah. I was going to mention him a little bit later on, but his name was Don Cushenberry. He was professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And it was at this time that I was working as a Title I teacher in Nebraska. And I had been working with these kids and with difficulty, and I was doing all the usual things, working on phonics, comprehension, vocabulary, and for the most part, they were making pretty good progress. But there was a certain group of kids you just couldn't budge off the dime, it seemed, no matter what I did. Well, Don had us reading, Dr. Cushenberry had us reading some of these articles that were just beginning to appear on this topic called reading fluency. One of them was called Fluency, the Neglected Goal of the Reading Program by Dick Allington. Another one was called The Method of Repeated Readings by Jay Samuels. Another one was called After Decoding, Then What by Carol Chomsky. After working with kids on phonics and decoding, and they seem to be getting it, but they're not making any progress, then what do you do? And her answer was to work on fluency with these kids. So I began to apply these things that I'd been learning from Dr. Cushenberry in my classrooms. And lo and behold, these kids began to take off. In some cases, it was really quite spectacular to see them grow from, essentially non-readers or, kids who are well behind to, making significant progress. So that actually became sort of the impetus for my 40 plus years working in this area called reading fluency. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because it seems that sometimes in the classroom, we're so overwhelmed with minutia. Get this report handed in.
Yeah.
Finish this up. Cover this because we have a state test coming up soon. That we lose sight of the fact that we're not only teaching curriculum, but more importantly, we're teaching students.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's the students and their needs that we need to address first. So by making those adjustments, as you say, can turn things around 180 degrees.
Right. Keep your eyes on the kids and their needs. They're and easily distracted. And I can say the same thing at the college level too. One of the things I'm not going to miss about being a college professor are the committees and the reports and the same things that all the folks who are in K-12 schools deal with. So it's trying to get ourselves focused on what really matters, and that is difficult.
Now you talk about low levels of literacy in a lot of your work, and that's a challenge for a lot of us teachers and a lot of the specialists. Is there a major cause or a group of causes that lead to these low levels of literacy?
I mean, I'll give you my professional opinion on that. Foundational reading skills. There was some study by Sheila Valencia and Marcia Booley, University of Washington, several years ago, where they looked at third and fourth graders who performed poorly on these state mandated reading tests. Every spring, third and fourth graders around the country giving comprehension assessment. Read some passages, silently answer some questions. And they were interested in the kids who did poorly. And what they found was, of course, there's a variety of reasons, but what they seemed to focus on was what I guess we would call these foundational skills. They had problems with decoding, but also with reading fluency. They were kids who, if they could read the words, they read them at an excessively slow pace. They read without any sense of expression or meaning. And of course, as a result of that, comprehension was compromised. I think, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to maybe 85% of the kids who were having difficulties exhibited problems in those foundational areas. And of course, what happens is that snowballs. when you move on to fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, and you're still having difficulty with fluency and word decoding and vocabulary, the texts keep getting more and more challenging, and you are falling further and further behind, as any teacher has seen with their students. So yeah, and again, that's my reason for getting into this notion of reading fluency. And another reason, of course, if I can elaborate a little bit more,
Sure.
As anybody's listening to this podcast knows, that the last year or 2 years or so, there's been this increased emphasis on phonics instruction. We need to teach kids decoding, and certainly don't have any disagreement with that. We do. My experience in the Catholic schools, but fluency is one that continually gets neglected. I mentioned to you 1985, the work by Dick Allington, who wrote Fluency, the Neglected Goal of the Reading Program. He said, all you have to do is listen to kids read for a minute, and you can tell whether or not fluency is an issue. That's overly slow, staccato, lack of joy in their reading. And what Dick said is we can see it, but what do we do about it? And the answer was not much. And it's continued to be, in my mind, anyways, a neglected program. National Reading Panel came up and said fluency was important, yet when we implemented Reading First, some of you remember in the early 2000s, that was President George W. Bush's reading initiative. Have primary grades classrooms teach all these 5 elements, phonics, fluency, phonemic awareness, vocabulary comprehension. And of course, by doing that, this science-based instruction, we should get good results. Kids should be on grade level by the end of grade 3. Well, it didn't turn out that way. They didn't see any big difference between these reading first schools and the non-reading first schools. When they took a closer look at what was actually going on in the classrooms, fluency was largely neglected. Less than 5 minutes per day was devoted to fluency instruction. And, I can't help but, I wonder if perhaps that was a reason why Reading First didn't turn out the way it is. Maybe perhaps that's the reason why our reading achievement in 4th grade and 8th grade continues to be relatively flat over the last 30 or so years. Fluency is neglected. In fact, I did a study with some of my graduate students a couple years ago where we surveyed primary grade teachers all around the country. We asked them, how much time do you devote to phonics? How much time each day do you devote to comprehension, fluency, and all those issues? And again, the loser in all this was reading fluency. Tim Shanahan says we should devote as much time to fluency as we should to phonics, but we're finding that less than half the time was devoted to fluency as it was to phonics. And again, I think perhaps if we could do a more greater emphasis, shine the line on fluency, maybe we could see a little bit more progress in terms of our student achievement. So that's my biased opinion, but I think it's a good one. I think it's one worth continuing to explore.
Now, does self-esteem or the economic factor in the school systems, do those have any influence whatsoever?
Oh yeah, I forget who said this once, but somebody made the remark at a conference that the best predictor of reading achievement is one's zip code, where you live, and of course the references to the economic advantages and disadvantages of different places where we work. And that's it definitely is a factor. And along with that, is access to materials. One of the things we do know is that children who live in less advantaged areas have less access to stuff to read. Whether it's the community library or the school library or whatever it might be. So yeah, definitely. But the whole notion of the economic factors, that's a tough nut to crack, and well beyond my pay grade, I'll tell you that. But I will tell you that self-esteem matters too. If you think you're a good reader, you're going to read more, right? It's just success breeds success. I was thinking about a student in our reading clinic. His name is Taylor, or was Taylor. He came to our reading clinic. It's a summer reading clinic at the university, and he came into second grade, pretty much a non-reader, very much at the basic levels. And I still remember his mother bringing him into the classroom for the first time, and he was in tears. He didn't like to read. He wasn't a good reader, and the last thing he wanted to do was spend his summer vacation doing more reading. And it was painful for him. Well, we call our reading clinic Camp Read a Lot. And what we try to do is not only develop skill in reading, but also a love of reading in students. One of the things we have kids do is they learn to perform, and eventually they write their own poetry, which they then perform every day. The goal is for kids to learn to read something well. And what is it you can learn to read well, in a fairly short amount of time, 90 minutes or so? Well, a poem or a song lyric or something like that. Well, anyways, to make a long story short, Taylor really got into this. He started writing his own poetry, which, by the way, we published in a book. Every student contributes 2 or 3 poems to a book, then we kind of do a homemade publication of. But what a great keepsake they have. But I remember him on the last day of a reading clinic, about 6 weeks later. All the students perform for their moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas, and he's up there standing in front, and he's reading a poem that he had written, and he would perform a reader's theater script that was part of the instruction. And of course, he got the applause and recognition from mom and dad and classmates and so on. Well, afterwards, we're having punch and cookies, and he comes up to me, and I still remember he tugs on my sleeve and he goes, "Mr. Rasinskl, can we keep doing Camp Read a Lot?" This is the kid who 6 weeks earlier was in tears because he didn't want to be there, and now he wants it to continue. His summer vacation would not be complete without another 6 weeks, perhaps. There. And, what we tried to do was develop in him, that sense of accomplishment. When you can learn to read something well every day, like a poem, even though it's short, you've got that sense of accomplishment. And then he would take that poem home and perform it for mom and dad. And of course, they were there to, lavish him with praise that was well deserved. That's, when kids can feel successful, I mean, it's true for all of us. When you're successful at something, you want to continue. And of course, the opposite is true as well. So definitely self-esteem. The question is, how can we make that happen in our classrooms?
What I'm hearing from you seems to be that if we cross the curricula, if we look to make those connections, I know you're a big fan of kids writing poetry and reading poetry, singing, performing, doing things that take the regular academics and put them into a blend with the fine and performing arts. Yeah. So it reinforces the experience and makes it almost multifaceted rather than singular and stale and predictable.
Yeah, exactly. One of the big topics nowadays is knowledge. I think Natalie Wexler just wrote about a new study that came out about how developing in students' knowledge improves reading performance. Well, why not have kids, I'm talking about poetry, why not have them learn poetry that reflects perhaps American history? Perhaps Walt Whitman's "Oh, Captain, My Captain," or have them learn the Gettysburg Address. And in doing so, they're jumping into history and learning about content, knowledge, but at the same time, they're building fluency. Like you said, it's multifaceted. You get more bang for your buck. The sum is greater. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There, and that's what we've done with things like readers theater. I sit down with kids and we'll say, let's take this Gettysburg Address, and let's expand a lot of kids. Why was this speech given by President Lincoln in Pennsylvania back in 1863? Well, of course, there was that battle that preceded it the previous summer. So we do some research into that. And then we take the results of our research, and what we do is we turn it into a reader's theater script, which then we rehearse and perform for our classmates and stuff. So, it's kind of the whole ball of wax. We're learning content, but at the same time, we're writing, we're engaging in fluency practice. That's what I would call the art of teaching. Teaching these different competencies in ways that are engaging for students, that are authentic, that reflect real life. I remember one of my quotes that I remember from John Dewey is something to the effect that, what we do in school should reflect what happens in real life. And so often in school, what we see happening is not reflective of what happens in real life. It's quite divorced. And perhaps kids don't see that connection then between what they're doing and why it really matters. Certainly, we need to try to make that bridge for our kids.
So I'm hearing you say basically that teaching is not simply a science, but an art as well.
Yeah.
And that crossing curricula follows that traditional middle school approach where there aren't categories that are self-contained and separated from other categories, that it's a blending.
Yeah. I mean, that's what life is all about. Whatever we do, we just can't put ourselves in a silo. In fact, when we do that, we get a restricted view of reality. We need to expand and listen to the voices of others. I mean, this whole controversy now about, with reading, I think one of the problems is that we have gotten ourselves siloed into different groups. And what we need to do is begin listening to one another and talking with one another more respectfully, and perhaps finding, that common ground that Sam Bomarito likes to talk about. There is common ground, but we have to be willing to, expand our vision beyond our own personal views of things. I'll tell you that reading fluency is important, but I'll also tell you that yes, but we need to teach decoding, we need to teach vocabulary, we need to teach comprehension, you need to develop knowledge. All these things are all part of it. But again, when you can combine them, find ways of combining them, then you get that synergy that makes for very effective instruction, and also artful as well as scientific.
You raise a thought in my mind as you're speaking. We do a lot with standardized tests in the society, and we think that the district that has the best test scores must be teaching the best, and that the kids who score the best test scores are going to be the most successful in life.
Yeah.
Does the presence of those standardized tests foster an increase in reading, or does it maybe direct it into a different area that might even baffle or stifle a little bit?
Great question. I'm not sure I can answer that, provide an answer. We do need to track our kids to make sure that they're making progress so that we can intervene if they're not. But this, the focus on testing, we're to the point where, where we prepared kids for taking tests. I don't think that's a very productive activity. The tests are supposed to be reflective of what we teach, the content of what we teach. And that now it's becoming reflective of the preparation that we do with the kids for the test. So in a sense, the test data that we get is invalid, and we do so much of it. I've talked to teachers who not standardized tests, but they have to do this progress monitoring with some of their students who are having difficulty, and they have to spend 10 minutes every week assessing kids. Well, count the minutes. 10 minutes a day over 36 weeks, that's 6 hours of instruction that is spent testing. Time given to testing is time taken away from teaching. So we need to take another look at that whole notion of of assessment and yeah. Well, I mean, take a look at the college entrance examinations that we give kids now. That's taking Colleges are taking another look at that. There's other ways of looking at the way whether or not high school students are going to be successful in college, rather than again a standardized test. There's more ways of looking at that.
Do you find that today's reading teacher is better prepared to address the needs of the students than maybe the teachers 10, 15, 20 years ago? And I guess a companion question to that would be, are the districts doing enough once they hire a teacher
Mm-hmm.
to support that continued learning in reading?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be biased, and I'm as a college professor. Yeah, I would like to say that our students are better prepared. I think we've added to the course requirements just in the last decade or so here in Ohio. Um, we have to offer a course on phonics instruction which was not offered before. Um, and embedded in that, there is content on dyslexia, and that it was generally not really much of something that was addressed in the past. So I think we're doing our best to improve our instruction to prepare our students. But I think the key you hit on the nail on the head with that ongoing instruction, uh, especially those that the training provided by the schools themselves, because of course the schools have their own approach, their own curriculum, and teachers need to be trained in delivering that curriculum to their students. And it's a challenge, of course, because we've got all these new demands that are coming up here in Ohio. We are now Our governor is proposing that our teachers get additional training in particular areas that may or may not be part of what the responsibilities for certain teachers. And so what value might that training be? I think we need to be more sensitive to the individual schools and school districts, and the programs that they are actually using. And of course, part along with that would be the training of um, curriculum directors, school superintendents, principals. Those are the ones who choose curricula. Um, how do you know which is the right program to choose? What is the best way to set up your curriculum? And that requires ongoing training as well. And again, that would be something where our colleges could perhaps do a better job helping the administrators make those better decisions.
I want to ask you something that we hadn't talked about before, but again, listening to you have all these thoughts going through my mind. When kids spend a lot of time on screen, what effect in your opinion, is that having on literacy and their ability to, or even their desire to sit down with a paper text or a text online and read? Is it so negatively affecting their ability to concentrate, since TikTok videos tend to be a minute or two?
Yeah, yeah.
And we're in this fast-paced society where mindfulness and reflection seem to be in the background.
Yeah. When you first mentioned the use of screen time, I was thinking about things such as books that you might read on your Kindle, and I don't see any difficulty with that. But what you were mentioning about the Instagram, the TikTok, all these things that are quick exposures. Yeah, I think there is a difficulty with that. It's hard to you focus for a minute or two and then you're off to something else. So how does that translate into a classroom where the teacher is asking you to attend to something for 20, 30 minutes at a time. I was just listening to a podcast by Dan Willingham, and he's been writing a lot about this, and how how can we keep a focus? How can you have students do things such as take notes, and have the value of those kinds of things in the classroom? And I think this TikTok society that is evolving is going to be a detriment, to be honest with you. It's a good thing that schools and parents and even our governments are beginning to see that as an issue, and perhaps find ways to limit that for our students. But
Do you have any solutions?
no, no, no. Again, way beyond my pay grade here. From a parent's perspective, it's finding put limitations on kids. I know in my son and my daughters who have kids, they've been trying to do that. It's a challenge because these things are so inviting for kids. To get on the TV to watch. I don't even know what these called, but these gamers that they just watch, and for could be for hours, and parents have to put limits on it and find time. Say we're going to read as a family 30 minutes a day. Putting those kinds, making those kinds of restrictions work, and of course same thing in a classroom too. Structure a classroom so that we do spend 20 to 30 minutes per day engaged in real reading.
As a language arts teacher who teaches both reading and writing, I've tried over the years to have the writing, if not directly related to the reading, at least somewhat inspired by it, or patterning. And one of the things that I think for me is a necessity, and you can agree or disagree, I'd like to see the kids take what's there and then reflect, discuss. One of the things I've said to parents over the years, if your child is watching TV and now being on the phone or on the apps too long, if you can't stop it, yes, you need to limit it, but then maybe talk about, what did you see?
Yeah.
What came up on that screen that didn't shock you, or did shock you, or you found humorous? Because you can learn so much about the way a kid's processing information in just a simple conversation to see how they're reacting.
Yeah. We oftentimes, I think perhaps as parents and as teachers, we just say, cut it off. But yeah, great point. The idea of talking, engaging in a discussion. Why is this so attractive to you? And perhaps get a better insight into what's going on with our kids. I like what you said though about connecting reading with doing something with what. I think it was David Pearson who said, one of the best comprehension strategies is just when you read something, do something with it. I think of myself, whenever I do some professional writing, it's always based upon something I've read previously. In fact, you have to put in your references. Well, the notion is that if I write something that has the kernel of a new idea, it's based upon something I've read before. So I had to understand that material. So with that idea that you brought up I really think is so central. One of the best ways of developing comprehension is not necessarily teaching kids, those various skills, although there's value to that, but say, let's do something with that. In my own mind, something we've done, again, going back to my fluency stuff, is when kids might take a story, say, for example, Frog and Toad by Arnold Lobel, and they read the story, but then, the teacher says, well, can we turn that into a reader's theater script? Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to dig back into that story and understand it more thoroughly, deeply, in order to write that script. And then, of course, you have to practice the script and perform it. Or when students, we've had some middle grade students take Langston Hughes, mother to son poem. Well, son,
Yes.
life for me ain't been no crystal stair.
Hmm.
And again, they change it in some way, turn it into a script, turn it into a conversation between a mother and son that's not poetic. Put in different characters. I remember in one class, it was not mother to son, it was coach to team. There, and in all those cases, what is required then is to go back into that original text and actually do a deeper analysis, a deeper understanding, so that you can create something new with it. And again, that's the art. One of the things we talk about in our book, the artfully teaching science reading, is one of the characteristics of artful instruction is creativity. When students can create something new, um, that's being artful as well as scientific, but also I guess I would say when we give teachers the license to be creative, and I think we're losing some of that. We're getting this overly scripted instruction coming out. I guess there's a lack of trust in teachers. But when it's over, when you get these really highly scripted uh, programs, how can teachers be creative? It's almost it boxes out that creativity. So, I just think we need to give both our students and our teachers that room to use their muses, if you will. Um, Most of us became teachers to begin with because of that. We were creative people.
I always say that if we could teach like the great chef prepares a meal, rather than the way the fast food restaurant standardizes what
Yeah,
you get in every single state with the same flavor, the same ingredients, looking the same,
yeah.
maybe we'd have a really tremendous education system that would even go farther than our great system has gone already.
Well, we sure have some great models of what we could do.
Yeah.
When everything's standardized, where can we find the exceptional classroom? Everything looks the same.
Now, I have three questions that I'd like to share with you. And a Twitter colleague of ours, Helen Prue, asked me to pose these to you. Helen is a reading recovery teacher with the St. James Asamboya School Division for grades 1 and 2. And her first question is, do you have any suggestions on how teachers might incorporate practices that will ensure they grow and improve their literacy teaching over time?
Yeah. Well, first of all, shout out to Helen. I know Helen through Twitter as well. Um, Really dedicated teacher and
Yes.
has some great ideas. Uh, Great question. Uh, how can we improve and incorporate practices for professional practices? Um, and when I thought about that, you sent me the question in advance. I thought, well, let's get back to um, technology here. The use of podcasts, blogs. Evan Robb has a blog called The Robb Review, where he asks people to offer opinions and ideas on instruction. These are, you know, um, short reads, short listens, but can be quite impactful. I was mentioning podcasts this morning before we started our chat. I went out for a walk and I had my phone with me and I was listening to Jennifer Saravallo's podcast, and I
Yes.
listened to two actually, the Daniel Willingham one and the one by Henry May, the researcher from the University of Delaware who has done some recent research on reading recovery. And so here I am taking a walk, and in an hour and a half or so, I got quite a bit of information. And so the same thing with blogs and this. So that would be the first thing that would come to my mind. It's easy, the access to information is getting easier and easier and easier. And of course, Helen's on Twitter, you're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter. I'm always, people are recommending things to read, and finding good suggestions that way as well.
Her second question is this: what's the role of writing in developing children's literate minds, and how might teachers leverage the power of writing in their classroom practices? And I know we've covered a little bit of this already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. They're reciprocal. When you're writing, you have to read, and of course, uh, uh, writing, of course, improves your reading. To the at the lowest levels to the highest levels. I was mentioned how the Sisters of Saint Joseph had me writing my cursive and my handwriting, as ways of learning those letters and words. But definitely the question again is how to do that. And the thing that popped into my mind was the that notion of mentor texts, taking something what we read and then doing something with it. Um, that opening chapter to Hatchet, by oh gosh, now I can't remember the author's name. Do you remember? That's
It's
my brain. Gary Paulson.
Paulson.
Yeah. Okay, we got it together. You got the first name, I got the last name. Anyways, we've actually had students do this. Take that opening chapter where the plane crashes and this young man finds himself alone, with only a hatchet, in the wilderness, and story of survival. Take that and turn that into a 1 or 2 page script. So number one, what they're doing is they're reading, of course, Mr. Paulson's book, but then of course they're writing it in the form of a script. So again, deeper comprehension. But again, what they're doing is they're examining the excellent writing by a published author. You get Gary Paulson, and using that as a model for their own writing. And I know for myself, the best way to become a good reader is to read a lot, and the best way to become a good writer is to read a lot, because you begin to incorporate those things that you see in other people's writing into your own writing. So you've got to find a ways of taking what we read and turning it into a writing experience, and of course going from writing into reading as well. And that's the art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's Helen's final question. And basically, she's looking for ways that teachers can create opportunities for children to be independent learners who feel a sense of agency from the earliest experiences right up through learners of any age.
Yeah. That's by sense of it. The fact that, again, going back to what Dewey is talking about, that what we're doing in our classroom really matters. That what kids do really matter. And so that notion of finding authentic projects or authentic activities for kids to do. I keep mentioning the idea of taking a story and turning it into a poem, or a poem into a story or a script or whatever. But we can even do further, take it to the next level. Nell Duke has been writing about project-based learning, where students in elementary, I think she writes about for the most part, engage in a project, a community project. Maybe they're trying to improve the local park, or get some issue noticed by the county council. When students engage in those projects, of course, they got to engage in high level comprehension, deep reading, writing. And what Nell has found in her work is that, of course, what it does lead to improved reading performance on the part of students, and writing as well, and of course deeper knowledge. Getting that importance of knowledge. Well, how do we get things done in our community? This is the governmental processes that we use. So those kinds of things, finding the projects, and of course this goes all the way goes all the way back to John Dewey, the project-based method. But again, it's not easy to do. It takes more work, but I think the results are really can be quite remarkable. Yeah. I mean, I think about my own experiences as a student, and it was those things where we had some sort of project to do as a class. We worked on it collaboratively, and we got something done that we could be proud of, some product. We read, we wrote, we did research, and came up with something that was a real authentic product. I'd love to see more and more of that happening in our classrooms.
I'm sure there are some parents, grandparents, guardians of youngsters who are struggling readers, maybe even adults who are struggling readers, and the teachers who are teaching these youngsters. Is there a message you'd like to give to these folks?
Um, well, yeah, for parents, be advocates for your children. We can't expect parents to be teachers, but uh, certainly be advocates. Be close to the teacher, find out what's going on, and we're seeing more and more of that. Some of the work, the changes that are being advocated at the state levels now are actually being prompted by parent advocates who have decided to become more active. Um, and of course, for teachers, I guess the thing that I would say, especially working with struggling readers, is that idea of we need to know where kids are having difficulty. So it's a matter of collecting data and analyzing it. Okay, is child having difficulty with phonics, or is it reading fluency, comprehension, motivation? Just where it is. We can't address a problem if we don't know where the problem is. And that's where I was listening. I mentioned the Henry May podcast I was listening to. He actually mentioned that. He was talking about how important it is uh, for us to kind of sit in the middle between practice and research. And we need to do more of a collaboration between, the college, the folks who do the research, and, teachers who are in the trenches every day. And I think his point was that we haven't been doing that as well as we should. We need to realize that teachers have a lot to offer, and so do the researchers. But unless we start talking with each other, we're going to be in those siloed positions where we're going to be talking across each other, not with each other.
Now, for folks who would like to reach out to you, maybe pose a question, bring you into a district, would you like to remind them how they may do so?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Email is probably the best way. Again, it's T Rasinskl without the I. So it's TRASINSK at Kent.edu. That's probably the best. I try to respond to folks. In fact, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, or insights from our chat together, drop me a line. I try to make a point to get back to folks within 24 hours. So I do answer my email. That would probably be the best way.
I can vouch for that, because the times I've reached out to Tim, he's always been very, very conscientious about getting back to me. And that's
what happens is, and it's probably true for all of us, if you don't respond right now, then it kind of falls to the bottom of the pile. And I can't tell you the number of times that has happened. And it's embarrassing. Oh, I was supposed to call, talk to this person, and now it's 3 weeks later.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Tim Rasinskl, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us on We Have Issues. I'm sure that our listening audience is very grateful, as am I, for the insight you've provided into the controversy surrounding the teaching of reading in our schools and in our homes, as well as the fact that you bring a very much common sense approach, balanced centrist approach to things that can be controversial. And I think that you're very wise in doing that. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
Well, that concludes this episode of We Have Issues, where we examine important issues throughout the educational community. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.